Okay, we are recording. It is, exactly 7:05 p.m. Central Standard Time. And today is Tuesday, November the 16th, 2021. And welcome to week number 2 of Drugs and Crime. And I'm Professor Richard Wright. Kind of funny thing, little story for you guys. Funny. Last night I did a lecture on constitutional law, but I got my days mixed up, and I was thinking that it was Tuesday. I guess I was wishful thinking. And so I started doing the lecture and I started talking about the assignments. And there was only one student present at the time. And she says, Professor Wright, I wasn't aware of the quiz. I says, yeah. And I put it up. I said, oh, the quiz happens every week, except the last week is the final exam. She said, oh, okay. And then she says, wait a minute. She typed in the chat box, I believe that's the wrong class that you're talking about. So I said, oops, my bad. And I had to change gears. But that's the human side of me. So I laughed at it. I thought it was very hilarious. And she did too. So I'm glad she was there, though, because I would have gone through the whole lecture and then would have to re-record it all over if no one was there. But anyway, it is Tuesday for real. So let's take a look at sharing my screen. And let's click on that. Highlight that. And now you can see the screen. And you see the stuff that you see when you open up. Grade book discussions. So let's take a quick gander at the calendar. Why do I do that every week? For a very good reason. Students sometimes say, I don't know where to, and so I put it on here anyway. I know it's some of you says, I don't need to hear that. Yeah, I know, but I have to do it. This is where we are today. We are 2 weeks into the course. Initial post due tonight. Live lecture right now. Reply post due Saturday. Initial post, assignment due Sunday the 21st. And then the live lecture phrase, and then of course your second quiz, which you know already is time. And just to show you, the course actually ends December 17th. All assignments must be turned in by December 17th. And it's amazing. It never fails, but I get at least 2 students that will submit assignments the 18th or the 19th because they're used to doing them on Sundays and Saturdays. And I have to tell them, unfortunately, I can't do it. And they said, was there anything I can do? I said, no, I'm sorry. Unless you got the proper incomplete by the 17th. And I've done that, then deals off. So it's important. It's important. And again, I have to do it every week because I have been teaching so long that I see certain things happen. All righty, let's go right to announcements. Oh, well, I'll tell you this anyway before we get to announcements. Your Module 1 assignment that was completed will be due to be graded by Friday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And your discussion posts, of course, we usually grade those by Sunday, at least some of them. But anyway, the bottom line is your grades for everything. The one thing that comes right away is the quiz. And you take that right away. And then, of course, your live classroom recording if you go down and put your key word in or phrase, then you will get credit for that right away. So the ones I have to actually physically grade are discussion posts and the assignments. So be aware of that. So you wonder, why does it work like that? Okay. So now let's go down to announcements. So here we are, week 2 announcement. Okay, put up a little, I'll move it down a little. So this week, legislation regarding drug use and abuse. Chapters 5 and 8 of the textbook, which I previously sent you the PowerPoints. And then we're going to talk about the regulation of drug precursors, regulation of synthetic drugs, and then we're going to look at a video, Freakonomics of crack dealing. Now be aware when I put the video on, sometimes the sound is not the best, but it gives you a chance to at least look at something that can help you with your assignments during class. You can also go back and look at it yourself. Then I'm going to show you how to do the federal drug activity laws. You'll deal with that yourself. And then we move right along, and it tells you the time of the lecture, the length of the lecture that you don't need to know because you're already here. Be sure to participate in the discussion assignment, which is mandatory sentencing for drug-related crimes. We'll talk about how that works. And then finally, the history of drug and alcohol-related legislation and policies. And then you'd be aware that you also have a quiz. And those two are due on Sunday. So back into the discussion, initial post tonight, reply post Saturday. I told you that already, but I just remind you again. So, and then my adversity is springboard to success. If you get a chance to take a look and listen to that. Okay. So now let's move this up here. Let's move right into week number 2. Regulations. History of regulating drug abuse and abuse. So let's look at the written assignment first. Let's get that out of the way so that you will be up to speed on how to do and what to do. Now, I already told you this last week. Please download this scenario concerning Dave, because I said that you will use that in every one of your written assignments. So I would have it on my desktop or someplace where you have it. If you do not include this information, you will lose points, and you will see it's required in the instructions as well as in the rubric. So let's go right to the instructions. Explain the federal drug schedule level, which you should be aware of now because we covered that last week. That applies to each of the drugs that Dave uses. Describe what the federal and state laws regarding legality of each drug Dave uses. Now, make sure you identify what state you are referencing. That's what I was going to tell you. I recommend using your state, using your own state. But some people don't want to use their state. Some people want to use a state like New York or California. And those are, they have quite a bit of information, or other states. But you can use your state. Minnesota has a nice one, and as well as Wisconsin, Illinois deals with it as well. I don't know about Florida, but Florida probably does. But identify and compare the how the state and federal legislation, drug abuse, illegal use, and alcohol use differs from before 1996. Compare today's law enforcement policies concerning drug abuse, illegal use, and alcohol use differs from prior to that. we talk about that. Identify how the state and federal legislation and law enforcement policies prior to 1996 would have affected Dave's sentencing. Remember, before. Next, identify the difference in today's. So you're going to provide pre-1996 and post-1996 for Dave. Okay? Now, you're going to do this in the form, you can do it in an infographic. If you do an infographic, please do not submit it do not submit it any other way but Word. A brochure or flyer. Most students that do this assignment in the past have done a brochure where they talked about pre-1996, post-1996 on one side or the other. So that's a good way to do it and to identify the scheduled drugs that Dave uses. Now, it's important that you recognize that I want credible sources. Now, this says a minimum of 2. Well, I want more than 2. And the reason why I say more than 2, let me explain to you why I say that. When writing a source for a reader, every source that you utilize, you should be able to cite that source so that if the reader wanted to read beyond what you put in your paper, they can go to it. And you do it appropriately using APA citations. And please have a reference page. Okay, 2 credible sources, APA formatted references at the end. You can have 2 references and have more than 1 citation, but the point of the matter is that citations support your statements that are included in your written assignments. That's why I say that constantly, and I spend a whole lot of the quarter talking about that, and it reflects in the grading. And those of you who do poor will not follow what I say and will follow, I don't know what you're following, but it is important. I'm trying to help you to get good grades in this course. This is really a big part of it. Spelling, grammar, punctuation, and you already know that I use a Grammarly check to check for plagiarism to see if you have critical thinking included in there. Now, applying all of this together, and this is exactly how I grade you, so you don't have to wonder. I'm telling you up front that if you do this over here in emerging, your grade's going to be very low, and it'll be a failing grade because it's 50%, almost a little over 50% taken off, a little under 50% taken off. It's about 40, 45%, something like that. But anyway, yeah, it's about 45% taken off. But the point of the matter is that you will end up with 55%. Do you want that? Do you want to lose 45% of your grade on any area? I don't think so. You don't have to answer me. I don't think you do, because you'll be very dissatisfied with your GPA and come back. But I'm showing you how to do this. Sometimes students say, you sound like a parent when you do that. Well, I guess I do go to the parent mode, especially when I'm doing this part, because I want my students to do the best. I want you to perform well. I have compassion for you, but I'm not going to do your assignment for you. So here's what I say. Follow the mastery column. Act as if proficiency, competence, and emerging don't exist. Remember I talked about AB students? This is A and this is low B. But you see the difference. You lose 15 points here. So you get to this almost a C, but it's B. So you don't want to do that. you want to shoot for as many points as possible in here. And the neat part about my grading is that when I read your papers, and I do read exceptionally fast, I know what I'm looking for. Um, I guess that's the lawyer in me. When I was in law school, they taught us how the professors graded us by issues, identifying did we satisfy the requirements of the issues that are specified. And it is so important for you. All right. So federal drug schedule and legality, you already know that part. So you're going to provide an exemplary explanation of the schedule that you're familiar with for each of the drugs Dave uses, with thorough details on the legality um, of each per federal and state. Remember, when you specify state law, specify which state you are and cite your sources. Professor Wright, you sound like a broken record. That is all right. I don't mind doing that because those who get the higher grades in my classes do satisfy those requirements. State and federal legislation using information literacy, that is credible sources. Again, that's included throughout your paper. Prior to 1996, with thorough and supporting details. Notice if you don't have credible sources, I can't put you over here because this says with supporting details. This is with minimal supporting details. This is with none. So you go from here to here real quick. I don't even have to go to the middle. I don't think you want that. And then the same thing with pre-1996. So you got post-1996 and pre-1996. Dave's sentencing. Exemplary identification on how the state and federal legislation prior to 1996 would impact Dave's sentencing, with thorough details on the differences in today's Dave's sentencing. Again, having a chart on and having that on there labeled Dave's sentencing pre-1996 and then elaborating on it. Double spaced in the document itself. Do not put references in the body of the paper. There is a specific page for references. Students make that mistake and they think that putting references in the body satisfies the requirement. No, because there are two different forms of information. And you know that if you're familiar with APA. And then the current literature we're organized through digital resource. There we are talking about credible sources again. And then professional language, spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So that's it. Does anyone have any questions about this week 1 written assignment? Type in the chat box yes or no. If you have a question, let's get to it and let's help yourself and somebody else. There are no dumb questions. I don't see anything in the chat box. You all good? Are you good? Are you there? Okay, hold on. Okay, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to type a question. Let me open it up to take a look at it. I'll tell you in a second the answer to that question. Where's my chat box on here? It should be up here somewhere. Okay. I don't know what happened to my chat. It should show up here, participants. Okay, maybe it's under the more section. Oh, there it is. It shouldn't be over there. Okay, let's see what you said. Denise says, is there a certain amount of pages? That's a very, 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 very good question. No, there is not. But that's why the format I want you to use is not straight essay. I do want you to use essay, but I want it to be presented in the form of a flyer brochure that you don't have to use the infographic. It's very simply one side and the other side. You know how you have pros and cons and stuff like that. So that's an excellent question. I'm not going to grade you on page content, but I am going to grade you on whether you hit the points and whether you hit them uh, adequately to give me the information. Okay, but that's a perfect question. Thank you so much for that question. I appreciate when students step out and ask questions. Okay, anything else, guys? Okay, looks like we're good. Okay, okay. All right. Whenever somebody don't type anything in the chat box, whether it's yes or no or something, um, I wonder. And the reason why I say that is because I had somebody tell me something and they said, oops. I said, yeah, you just told off on yourself. They said they were multitasking while they were listening to the lecture. I said, why are you doing that? This isn't substitute for being physically in the class. You know, I can't come to every one of you guys all over the country at the same time. I'd be like God, omnipresent, but I'm not. Okay. All right. So I remember, I always remind people. And then if those of you who are listening to the recording afterwards, um, I had a student told me that they do their laundry while listening to my lectures. I hear all of you are laughing already over there doing that, unless you do something like that. Because why would you want to do your laundry while you're trying to listen to something that's helping you get your assignments done? That means you're going to miss something, right? That means you'll hear the lecture, but not listen to it. All right. There's that parent in me again. I guess it'll never go away. That's why I teach. All right. Let's go with the discussion now. So, due tonight, the 1970 Controlled Substance Act and equivalent state laws impose mandatory sentencing for possession of drugs and controlled substance. We'll talk about that tonight. But the effectiveness of mandatory sentencing has been the topic of much debate, which you will hear me express tonight. Next, review the scenario below to keep in mind what you learn. And you're going to look at this. Okay. And then for your first post, all about Mary, for your first post, discuss whether you agree or disagree with the mandatory 3-year sentence that they have in this scenario. And is the mandatory 3-year sentence appropriate for her crime? And what impact does that have on prison population or other areas of criminal justice system, including caseloads for prosecutors? And then your reply post, respond to a different student regarding Mary's mandatory sentence. So it says you can be sure to include citations. I'm okay with if you don't, but that it does come across as you're letting me know that, hey, I say this based on this, and this is the source that I rely on my statements. Get into that habit. That's a I'm in the habit all the way, 9,000%, because I went to law school and been a lawyer. I'm not trying to make you into lawyers, but what I am trying to make you into individuals that when you make a statement or provide details, you want to be professional about it. And that's what I'm building you toward. Somebody said, well, we're not professionals yet. I said, yes, you are. Yeah, you are. That's in your mind. You should be. You should always operate as if you were a professional because you're getting it from a professional. All right. So let's be successful. Some of you be reaching out to me later asking me for letters of recommendation, as I have 2 right now. Well, no, 1 now, I did the other one. And I go back and I check to see how my students did. All right. Quizzes. I'm not going to pull up the quiz because if I do, click on it, it's going to show the quiz and it'll be in the recording, and I'm not going to do that. Your live classroom recording session. This is really a point that you guys in the recording don't need to see, but I'll put it anyway. It tells you the link to get to the lecture, tells you the date and time. But by the time you see it, if you go to recording, this will be gone and it'll be replaced by the actual place where you get the recording. As well, I email it to you in the email. You'll get that tonight, unless there's some technical issues with WebEx, but so far so good. All right, so now let's get into, oh, my time is moving. So regulation of drug precursors, because I want to have enough time for this, this video to run. All right, and if I have to stop it, I'll stop it, but let's go to where we are. Okay, so we have a problem, people, in this country because of drugs like marijuana, cocaine, and heroin, and meth or methamphetamine that's cooked using all kinds of stuff. And I specifically say meth is very dangerous, and they use ether. We don't even, okay, forget that. You don't even know what that is. How about paint thinner? Can you imagine that in something that goes into your body? Think about it. That should gross you out right there. Acetone, anhydrous ammonia, iodine crystals, red phosphorus. Look, the last one, the next last 2. Drain cleaner. You know what drain cleaner does? Yes, it cleans drains. Stuff like Drano and stuff. Can you imagine that? You're smoking and injecting this into your body. What do you think that'll do to you? That'll kill you or get you extremely sick. It'll tamper with the brain. And this is the reason why it is a problem. It is important for you to remember as we go through each and every week the statement that it's called drugs and crime because drugs produce crime. Individuals commit crimes to support their drug habits. And so these items you're going to discover are regulated in the stores because if you're buying large volumes of it, I'm talking about meth, paint thinner, and stuff like that, and you're not a painter, uh, battery acid, um, a lot of cold medicine. I know a guy who was a syrup guy, we used to call him. He used to drink it. He used to take it, open up a bottle of, cough medicine, and he would just take it and scoff it down. And then he would go into it. He'd go into like a deep, sleep, nod or something. So these, and then when it's cooked, when the stuff is cooked, it turns into what we call crack primarily. I was the village attorney in the crack cocaine capital of the south suburbs. That's where I also was a police officer. And there were many houses out there that were abandoned that were utilized to cook this stuff. And they exploded, a lot of them, and fires constantly took place. But it looks like starch. It looks like starch, the old rock starch. When I was a kid, you guys probably primarily accustomed to spray starch, but there is they look like little mints, you know, the little white mints, but it's starch. Well, that's what that crack looks like, and it's ingested through snorting, smoking, and that. I'm I'm grieved about the whole process. I lost my baby sister over crack cocaine, and I had to bury that child. And if you listen to my story, she was the baby when my mother was killed. She never really knew her. So, but I'm trying to say this, I'm trying to get you to the point to understand that what the law is trying to do is to regulate this type of stuff because it is destroying the good minds that people have and causing them to commit crimes. And our meth labs, um, they move them real fast. And you can find it, as it says here, in cars and trunks, abandoned buildings. That's what I addressed a minute ago, and ditches as well. So what I was saying earlier is that finally what Congress decided to do is pass the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005. And then it requires retailers to um, of non-prescription products such as pseudoephedrine, ephedrine, and fentanyl to place these behind the counter so that people could, you know, would have to ask for them, and then you had to show ID and sign a logbook. And the purpose was that to try to reduce the number of meth labs. But that slowed it, but it didn't stop it. And so the laws have reduced the number of labs, but not the manufacturer because it's gone to Mexican um, drug trafficking where it's manufactured there and then brought into the country. And Mexico is just one place. So organizations um, bring meth into the cities, urban areas, and now in all over. So then you ask yourself think about it. Has your state passed a law dealing with this issue? We do in Illinois. And then you think it has some impact. And the answer is yes, but it's de minimis. You'll hear me talk over and over about what the real deal is here in terms of dealing with that. And then the other area involves synthetic drugs. These are also derived from chemicals, and they're manufactured, and they're called synthetic cannabinoids and bath salts. Synthetic cannabinoids, they look like those things you see on here. They look like candy. They look like candy, and you used to be able to see a lot of them in these little convenience stores and drug stores. But they are all, if you go, you could go on the internet and Google K2 and spice, and you'll find that. Um, and they came from primarily China, Asia, foreign countries. Um, but the thing about these is that individuals who use these, they have some extremely terrible issues with themselves, but they are not detectable in drug screens or urinalysis. So if a person is on paper, what we call probation or parole, and they have to do drops, then they can use this to avoid drug detection, but it's very lethal. And then it talks about this, the poisons that, because it's poisonous, it is poisonous, and the adverse effects. Look at what it does. It elevates your heart, your blood pressure, and actually that's what cocaine does. It elevates your heart rate, and it does your heart so it blows up. I saw in a video when I was in the academy as a police officer, the training that we had before we were certified, that uh, a balloon, you know how when you blow a balloon and you blow it up and it gets so big, then it explodes. Well, that's what people do. They increase the amount of drugs that they use for cocaine and so forth, trying to get to a high that they achieved once. And that's why it's called chasing it, is because of the fact that they do that, the heart just goes doom, 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 and they die, it explodes, then they drop dead. They're dead. That's it. They're dead. They're finished. So those are the kinds of things. And so then, so what they came out with legislatively was the Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act, which places these cannabinoids and cathinones in a Schedule 1. Schedule 1, you know where what that is, of the Controlled Substance Act. And then 43 of the states have similar laws as well. It's more than that now. Prior to 2010, cannabinoids were not controlled by any of the state or the federal. And so it's very important for you to realize that these are, they use the law to try to stop it. Then the last thing we're going to talk about is bath salts very quickly. Bath salts have nothing to do with taking a bath. This is something, and it shows you right here. It's a line. You see they put like a dollar bill and rolled it up and snorted it. And it takes you on a trip. And agitation, insomnia, rapid heart rate. Again, you go through a lot of changes. And then they talk about some instances called the zombie in Miami, where look at what happened. A naked man high on bath salts chewed the face of a homeless man in an 18-minute attack before finally being shot, because that person was out of their mind. Okay. And then finally, in 2011, DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, published a paper dealing with bath salts and makes possessing these illegal in our country. Okay, so the DEA is involved as well. Finally, in 2014, look at what happened is that the Senate passed a resolution designate the week of March 9th to 15th as Youth Synthetic Drug Awareness Week. I think Youth Drug Synthetic Awareness Week should be every week of the year and every day of the year. The key thing is that what it does to you is devastating, not just to you, but to your family as well. And then before we get to the video here, I want to have you to, later on, you can go back and you can do this little exercise yourself, a knowledge check. And you'll hit begin, and then you'll deal with these things here. And you'll deal with the federal laws and so forth and so on. So take the time to do this. There's 7 of them. All right. Any questions before we get to the video? Okay. This is a very interesting video. It is, it's about, let's see how many minutes long is it? It's about 20 minutes. Yeah, 20 minutes. So we might go a few minutes over, but I want you to see this one. So I'm going to take my headset off. He is saying it's kind of some humor in there, but some very real stuff. I know all about it because I represented as a lawyer gangs, and this has to do with crack dealing, which is a cheap high that a lot of people decided. Business owners who do let's get rid of the ad there. Company that does too. Get out of there. There it is. Okay.
Happy to know that I'll be talking not about my own tragedy, but other people's tragedy. It's a lot easier to be lighthearted about other people's tragedy than your own, and I want to keep in the spirit of the conference. So if you if you believe the media accounts, being a drug dealer in the height of the crack cocaine epidemic was a very glamorous life, in the words of Virginia Pastrell. There was money, there was drugs, guns, women, you name it, jewelry, bling bling. It had it all. Okay? What I'm going to tell you today is that, in fact, based on 10 years of research, a unique opportunity to go inside a gang, to see the actual books, the financial records of the gang, that the answer turns out not to be that being in the gang was a glamorous life, but I think more realistically, that being in a gang, selling drugs for a gang, is perhaps the worst job in all of America. And that's what I'd like to convince you of today. Okay, so there are three things I want to do. First, I want to explain how and why crack cocaine had such a profound influence on inner city gangs. Secondly, I want to tell you how somebody like me came to be able to see the inner workings of a gang. It's an interesting story, I think. And then third, I want to tell you in a very superficial way about some of the things we found when we actually got to look at the financial records, the books of the gang. Okay, so before I do that, just one warning, which is that this presentation has been rated R by the Motion Picture Association of America. It contains adult themes, adult language. Given who's up on the stage, you'll be delighted to know that, in fact, there'll be no nudity, barring a unexpected wardrobe malfunctions aside. Okay. So let me start by talking about crack cocaine and how it transformed the gang. Okay, and to do that, you have to actually go back to a time before crack cocaine in the early 80s and look at it from the perspective of a gang leader. Okay, so being a gang leader in the inner city wasn't such a bad deal in the mid-'80s, the early 80s, some say. Now, you had a lot of power, you got to beat people up, you got a lot of prestige, a lot of respect. But the thing is, there was no money in it. Okay, the gang had no way to make money. You couldn't charge dues to the people in the gang because the people in the gang didn't have any money. You couldn't really make any money selling marijuana. Marijuana's too cheap, it turns out. There's just no market for being. You can't get rich selling marijuana. You couldn't sell cocaine. Cocaine's a great product, powder cocaine, but you got to know rich white people. And most of the inner city gang members didn't know any rich white people. They couldn't sell to that market. You couldn't really do petty crime either. It turns out petty crime's a terrible way to make a living. So as a result, as a gang leader, you had, power, it's a pretty good life. But the thing was, in the end, you were living at home with your mother. And so it wasn't really a career. It was something that, it's just there were limits to how powerful and important you could be if you had to live at home with your mother. Okay. Then along comes crack cocaine. Okay. And in the words of Malcolm Gladwell, crack cocaine was the extra chunky version of tomato sauce for the inner city. Okay? Because crack cocaine was an unbelievable innovation. I don't have time to talk about it today, but if you think about it, I would say that in the last 25 years, of every invention or innovation that's occurred in this country, the biggest one in terms of impact on the well-being of people who live in the inner city was crack cocaine. Okay, it's for the worse, not for the better, for the worse. It had a huge impact on life. So what was it about crack cocaine? It was a brilliant way of getting the brain high. Okay, because you could smoke crack cocaine and you can smoke crack cocaine, you can't smoke powder cocaine, and smoking is a much more efficient mechanism of delivering a high than is snorting it. And it turned out there was this audience that didn't know it wanted crack cocaine, but when it came, it really did. And it was a perfect drug you could sell buy the cocaine that went in for $1, sell it for $5, highly addictive. The high was very short. So for 15 minutes, you get this great high. And then when you come down, all you want to do is get high again. Okay, it created a wonderful market. And for the people who were there running the gang, it was a great way, seemingly, to make a lot of money. At least for the people on the top. Okay, so this is where we enter the picture. Not really me. I'm really a big player in all this. My co-author, Sudhir Venkatesh, is the main character. Okay, so he was a math major in college who had a good heart and decided he wanted to get a sociology PhD, came to the University of Chicago. So the 3 months before he came to Chicago, he had spent following the Grateful Dead. And in his own words, he looked like a freak. Okay? He's a South Asian, very dark-skinned South Asian, big man, and he had hair, in his words, down to his ass. Okay? Defied all kinds of boundaries. Was he black or white? Was he man or woman? It was really a curious sight to be seen. So he showed up at the University of Chicago, and the famous sociologist William Julius Wilson was doing a book that involved surveying people all across Chicago. And he took one look at Sadir, who was going to go do some surveys for him, and decided he knew exactly the place to send him, which was to one of the toughest, most notorious housing projects, not just in Chicago, but in the entire United States. So Sadir, the suburban boy who had never really been in the inner city, dutifully took his clipboard and, walked down to this housing project, gets to the first building. First building, well, there's nobody there, but he hears some voices up in the stairwell. So he climbs up the stairwell, and he comes around the corner, finds a group of young African-American men playing dice. Okay. This is about 1990, peak of the crack epidemic. It was a very dangerous job being in a gang. You don't like to be surprised. You don't like to be surprised by people coming around the corner. And the mantra was, shoot first, ask questions later. Okay. Now, Sadir was lucky. He was such a freak. And that clipboard probably saved his life because he figured no other rival gang member would be coming up to shoot at them with a clipboard. So his greeting was not particularly warm, but they did say, well, okay, let's hear your question on your survey. So I kid you not, the first question on the survey that he was sent to ask was, how do you feel about these doors black? Makes you wonder about academics, okay? Well, so the choice of answers were very good. Bad, very bad. What Sadir found out is, in fact, that the real answer was the following. The survey was not, in the end, going to be what got Sadir off the hook. He was held hostage overnight in the stairwell. There was a lot of gunfire. There were a lot of philosophical discussions he had with the gang members. By morning, the gang leader arrived, checked out Sadir, decided he wasn't no threat, and they'd let him go home. So Sadir went home, took a shower, took a nap. And you and I, probably faced with a situation, would think, well, I guess I'm going to write my dissertation on the Grateful Dead. I've been following for the last 3 months. Sadir, on the other hand, got right back, walked down to the housing project, went up to the floor, the second floor, and said, hey guys, I had so much fun hanging out with you last night. I wonder if I could do it again tonight. And that was the beginning, what turned out to be a beautiful relationship that involved Sadir living in the housing project on and off for 10 years, hanging out in crack houses, going to jail with the gang members, having the car window shot out of his car, having the police break into his apartment, steal his computer disks, you name it. But ultimately, the story has a happy ending for Sadir, who became one of the most respected sociologists in the country. And especially for me, as I sat in my office with my Excel spreadsheet open, waiting for Sadir to come and deliver to me the latest load of data that he would get from the data. It's one of the most unequal co-authoring relationships ever, but I was glad to be the beneficiary of it. Okay, so what do we find? What do we find in the gang? Well, let me say one thing. So what we really got access to everybody in the gang. We got an inside look at the gang from the very bottom up to the very top. They trusted Sadir in ways that really no academic has ever, or really anybody, any outsiders ever in the trust of these gangs. To the point where they actually opened up what was most interesting for me is their books, their financial records that they kept, and they made them available to us. We not only could study them, but we could ask them questions about what was in them. So if I have to kind of summarize very quickly in the short time I have, what the sort of the bottom line of what I take away from the gang is that if I had to draw a parallel between the gang and any other organization, it would be that the gang is just like McDonald's, okay, in a lot of different respects, the restaurant McDonald's. Okay, so first, in one way, which isn't maybe the most interesting way, but it's a good way to start, is in the way it's organized, the hierarchy of gang, the way it looks. So here's what the org chart of the gang looks like. I don't know if any of you know very much about org charts, but if you were to kind of strip down and simplify McDonald's org chart, this is exactly what the org chart would look like. Now, it's amazing, but the top level of the gang, they actually call themselves the board of directors. Okay? And as Sadir says, it's not like these guys had a very sophisticated kind of view of like what happened in American corporate life, but they had seen movies like Wall Street, and they kind of had learned like a little bit about what it was like to be in the real world. Now, below that board of directors, you've got the essentially what are regional VPs, people who control, say, the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago. Now, Sudhir got to know very well the guy who had the unfortunate assignment of trying to take the Iowa franchise, which it turned out for this black gang was not one of the more brilliant financial endeavors that they undertook. Okay, but the thing that really makes the gang seem like McDonald's is its franchisees. That the guys who are running, the local gangs, the 4 square block by 4 square block areas, they're just like the guys, in some sense, who are running the McDonald's. They are the entrepreneurs. They get the exclusive property rights to control the drug selling. They get the name of the gang behind them for merchandising and marketing. And they're the ones who basically make the profit or lose the profit, depending on how good they are at running the business. Now, the group I really want you to think about, though, are the ones at the bottom, the foot soldiers. Okay, these are the teenagers typically who'd be standing out on the street corners selling the drugs. Extremely dangerous work. And important to note that almost all of the weight, all of the people in this organization are at the bottom. Okay, just like McDonald's. So in some sense, the foot soldiers are a lot like the people who are taking the order at McDonald's. And indeed, it's not just by chance they're like them. In fact, in these neighborhoods, they'd be the same people. So the same kids who were working in the gang were actually, at the very same time, they would typically be working part-time at a place like McDonald's. Okay, which already, I think, foreshadows the main result that I've talked about what a crappy job it was being in the gang. Because obviously, if being in the gang was such a wonderful, lucrative job, why in the world would these guys moonlight at McDonald's? Okay, so what do the wages look like? So you might be surprised, but based on the actual, being able to talk to them and to see their records, this is what it looks like in terms of the wages. The hourly wage the foot soldiers were earning was $3.50 an hour. It was below the minimum wage. Okay, and this is well documented. It's easy to see by the patterns of consumption they have. It really is not fiction, it's fact. There was very little money in the gang, especially at the bottom. Now, if you manage to rise up, say, and be that local leader, the guy who's equivalent of the McDonald's franchisee, you'd be making $100,000 a year. And that, in some ways, was the best job you could hope to get if you were growing up in one of these neighborhoods as a young black male. If you managed to rise to the very top, $200,000 or $400,000 a year is what you'd hope to make. Truly, you would be a great success story. And one of the sad parts of this is that, indeed, among the many other ramifications of crack cocaine, is that the most talented individuals in these communities, this is what they were striving for. They weren't trying to make it in legitimate ways because there were no legitimate channels out. This was the best way out. And it actually was the right choice, probably, to try to make it out this way. You look at this, the relationship with McDonald's breaks down here. The money looks about the same. Why is it such a bad job? Well, the reason it's such a bad job is that there's somebody shooting at you a lot of the time. Okay? So we're shooting at you. What are the death rates? Okay? We found in our gang, and admittedly, this was not really sort of a standard situation. This was a time of intense violence, of a lot of gang wars. As this gang actually became quite successful, but there were costs. And so the death rate, not to mention the rate of being arrested, sent to prison, being wounded, the death rate in our sample was 7% per person per year. You're in the gang for 4 years, you expect to die with about a 25% likelihood. Okay? That is about as high as you can get. So just for comparison's purposes, let's think about some other walk of life where you may expect might be extremely risky. Like let's say that you were a murderer and you were convicted of murder and you're sent to death row. Turns out the death rates on death row from all causes, including execution, 2% a year. Okay? So it's a lot safer being on death row than it is selling drugs out on the street. Okay? That makes you pause, gives you some pause, those of you who believe that the death penalty is going to have an enormous deterrent effect on crime. Now, to give you a sense of just how bad the inner city was during crack, and I'm not really focusing on the negatives, but really there's another story to tell you there. If you look at the death rates just of random young black males growing up in the inner city in the United States, the death rates during crack were about 1%. That's extremely high. This is violent death. It's unbelievable in some sense. Put it into perspective, if you compare this to the soldiers in Iraq, for instance, right now, fighting the war, 0.5%. So in some very literal way, the young black men who were growing up in this country were living in a war zone very much in the sense of the way that the soldiers over in Iraq are fighting a war. Okay, so why in the world, you might ask, would anybody be willing to stand out on the street corner selling drugs for $3.50 an hour with a 25% chance of dying over the next 4 years? Why would they do that? Okay? And I think there are a couple answers. I think the first one is that they got fooled by history. It used to be the gang was a rite of passage, that the young people controlled the gang, that as you got older, you dropped out of the gang. Okay? So what happened was the people who happened to be in the right place at the right time, the people who happened to be leading the gang in the mid to late 80s became very, very wealthy. And so the logical thing to think was that, well, the next generation, so they're going to age out of the game like everybody always has, and the next generation is going to take over and get the wealth. Okay? So there are striking similarities, I think, to the internet boom. Right? The first set of people in Silicon Valley got very, very rich. And then all my friends said, maybe I should go do that too. And they were willing to work very cheap for stock options that never came. Okay? In some sense, that's what happened exactly to the set of people we were looking at. Is that they were willing to start at the bottom, just like, say, a lawyer at a law firm, a first-year lawyer is willing to start at the bottom, work 80-hour weeks for not that much money because they think they're going to make partner. But what happened was the rules changed and they never got to make partner. Indeed, the same people who were running all of the major gangs in the late 1980s are still running the major gangs in Chicago today. They never passed on any of the wealth. So everybody got stuck at that $3.50 an hour job, and it turned out to be a disaster. The other thing the gang was very, very good at was marketing and trickery. And so, for instance, one thing the gang would do is, the gang leaders would have big entourages. They drive fancy cars and have fancy jewelry. So what Sedura eventually realized as he hung out with them more is that really they didn't own those cars, they just leased them because they couldn't afford to own the fancy cars. And they didn't really have gold jewelry, they had gold-plated jewelry. It goes back to the real versus the fake real. And really, they did all sorts of things to trick the young people into thinking what a great deal the gang was going to be. So, for instance, they would give a 14-year-old kid, they'd give him a whole, roll of bills to hold. That 14-year-old kid would say, oh, well, he would say to his friends, hey, look at all the money I got in the gang. It wasn't his money until he spent it, and then essentially he was in debt to the gang and was sort of an indentured servant for a while. Okay, so I have a couple minutes. Let me do one last thing I hadn't thought I'd have time to do, which is to talk about what we learn more generally about economics from the study of the game. Okay, so economists tend to talk in technical words. Often our theories fail quite miserably when we go to the data. But actually what's kind of interesting is that in this setting, it turned out that some of the economic theories that worked not so well in the real economy work very well in the drug economy, in some sense because it's unfettered capitalism. Here's an economic principle. This is one of the basic ideas in labor economics called the compensating differential. It's the idea that basically the increment of wages that a worker requires to leave him indifferent between performing two tasks, one which is more unpleasant than the other, that's what you call a compensating differential. It's why we think garbage men might be paid more than people who work in parks. Okay? So in the words of the gang, one of the members of the gang, I think, makes this clear. So it turns out, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, it turns out in the gang, when there's a war going on, that they actually pay the foot soldiers twice as much money. It's exactly this concept, because they're not willing to be at risk. So here's, in the words of the gang member, captures it quite nicely. It says, would you stand around here when all this shit, that means shooting, if all this shit's going on? No, right. So if I'm going to be asked to put my life on the line, then front me the cash, man. So essentially, I think the gang member says it much more articulately than does the economist about what's going on. Here's another one. So economists talk about game theory, that every two-person game has a Nash equilibrium. Here's the translation you get from the gang member. They're talking about the decision of why they don't go shoot. One thing it turns out to be a great business tactic in the gang, if you go and just shoot in the air, just shoot guns in the other gang's territory, all the people are afraid to go by the guns there, they're going to come into your neighborhood. So, but here's what he says about why they don't do that. He says, if we start shooting around there in the other gang's territory, nobody, and I mean you dig it, nobody going to step on their turf. But we got to be careful, because they can shoot around here too, and then we all fucked. Okay? So that's exactly the same concept. But then again, sometimes economists get it wrong. So one thing we observed in the data is that it looked like, in terms of the gang leader always got paid. Okay, he always, no matter how bad it was economically, he always got himself paid. So we had some theories related to cash flow and lack of access to capital markets and things like that. But then we asked the gang member, well, why is it you always get paid and your workers don't always get paid? His response is, you got all these niggers below you who want your job, you dig? If you start taking losses, they see you as weak and shit. Okay? I thought about it. I said, CEOs often pay themselves $1 million bonuses even when companies are losing a lot of money. And it never would really occur to economists that this idea of weak and shit could really be important. Or maybe weak and shit. Maybe weak and shit is an important hypothesis that needs to learn. Thank you very much.
Okay, very, very interesting video.
And every time I look at it and hear it, and students should be aware, I actually went through that as an attorney representing a lot of gangs, and seeing how they uh, profited big time and how they were able to pay the attorneys um, big time. And it was um, cash. That's how they did it. And there was a lot of money, guys. And so what I'm trying to say to you is this, is that the leaders, the top people made all the money. You know, whoop, I thought I thought I had stopped that. Let me, what happened? Let me go back. Hold a second. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Yeah, it didn't want to go away there. Okay. So anyway, my point is that there's a lot of money involved in that stuff. And so that's one of the reasons why we have trouble, guys, trying to help people who are hooked on this stuff. And notice that they talked about crack cocaine. Like I said, that's what killed my sister. That's what I did a lot of arrests on when I was a police officer, and the mentality of the people that were involved there. And it's really, really something. So you can carry that over to the things that we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. But it's very, very, very important. So anyway, that video is very important for you to understand the business workings of it, and how people made money. Um, the people that they basically used the people, weak-minded people, and so forth and so on. All right. Any questions from anybody before we adjourn? Okay. No questions? Okay. Are you guys there? You don't have any questions? There should be one question. Anybody? Okay. No questions. Denise, any questions? How about what's the key, or what's the code word? That's what I thought you were going to come up with. Now it's too late now. Okay. Um, what do you think? Suggestions? I'll give you a suggestion because I already know what I'm going to say. Want to take a shot? No, that's too general. Lindsay, any guesses? Okay, no guesses. Crack cocaine. That's it. See where I got that from, right? Crack cocaine. You were going to say drugs. Yeah, yeah, but I like to specifically talk about a topic that probably was mentioned several times during the lecture. And crack cocaine was mentioned in the video, of course, but I mentioned it several times earlier in the lecture. So, all right. So after a while, you'll begin to get the formula. Aha, I got you, Professor. But yeah, give me that and you get your points. All right, guys. I went over the assignments. You should be good to go with that. And anything you need, feel free to reach out to me. I will see you guys next I keep saying Wednesday, next Tuesday at at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. So good night, um, and stay safe. You're welcome.